Welcome to Represent NYC on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. I'm your host, Councilmember Ben Kallos. You can Facebook, tweet, or gram me in response to the show at Ben Kallos with the hashtag BigMoneyOut. Today we're here to discuss why it feels like government is broken, what many experts agree has led to a broken government, and an idea that's gaining traction to fix government and the city we live in. We're joined by Stanley Fritz, New York City campaign manager for Citizen Action, and Alex Camarda, senior policy advisor for Reinvent Albany. Let's jump right into it. If your #1 issue is affordable housing, income inequality, better schools, or climate change, why does campaign finance reform matter?
Well, that's pretty simple. If you care about any of those things, there are folks on the other side with a lot of money that don't want to see affordable housing, that want to make sure that you can put ankle bracelets on people who are not given bail so they can make money off of the prison industry. There are people who want to make sure that they can keep on getting like these properties all over your communities. And they have thousands of dollars to invest into campaigns to tell elected officials to vote a certain way. And with campaign finance reform, it gives you the tools so that you can fight back against that, protect elected officials who want to support you, and also, if they're not with you, run somebody who will.
Wow. Okay, now that we've got people's attention, let's learn a little bit more about our panelists. We have Alex Camarda from Reinvent Albany and Stanley Fritz from Citizen Action. Can each of you tell us a little bit about yourselves and your organizations?
Yes, so I'll go first. My name is Stanley Fritz. New York City campaigns manager at Citizen Action of New York. Been there for about 3 years, proud NYPERG alumni and SUNY Westbury graduate.
I'm Alex Camarda. I'm a senior policy advisor for Reinvent Albany. And Reinvent Albany is one of the 5 major good government groups in New York. We were founded in 2010 out of the frustration of trying to get congestion pricing through the state legislature. And so our executive director, John Caney, and many of our funders and board members care about transportation issues. But as Stanley pointed out, any issue that you care about is affected by donations that are made in support of candidates. And so our goal is to create an accountable and open New York State government.
So I hear both of you talking a lot about campaign money, but why do politicians need money for their campaigns? What are they spending that money on? Why do they need it?
They're spending money so they can talk to us. That's really what it comes down to. You're running for office, you got to get a number of votes, and the best way to communicate with people is to knock on doors, make phone calls, send mailers, and none of that stuff is free. And the more money you have, the easier it is to get all those things done and to a wider group of people. Unfortunately, in a lot of places that we live, you know, people can't afford to give $5,000 to one candidate, but they can give $10, $15, $25. And because of that, if you're a landlord and you can give $5,000 as an individual and then another $5,000 to your LLC, it can give you an edge as far as being heard.
So I think you just touched on it, but so how does that money from different industries factor into how politicians raise money for elections? You've mentioned the prison industrial complex, you've mentioned real estate. Can you dig in a little bit deeper and how those impact the decisions elected officials are making?
Well, yeah, because most elected officials, especially what we see at the state level, is they're working on policy, they're legislating, but then they have to fundraise. They're spending almost every night at the Capitol fundraising, and they throw these big dollar fundraisers, and who's going to come in there that can give a large amount right away? Lobbyists, people in the real estate industry, millionaires, and they have these special interests. So they'll come in there, they'll sign a check with the max contribution, and they'll go, listen, I heard there's a bill on the floor right now to do a rent freeze. Don't do that. Here, take this contribution, talk to your constituents, and like just stay frozen here. And they can use those dollars and that access that they have because of their dollars to help to sway conversations. And that's really hard to say no to when you got an election 4 years from now or 2 years from now, and you may have an opponent who's not as good for your constituents, but has more dollars so can reach more people.
So campaign finance laws govern how candidates raise money to run for office, for how elected officials run for re-election and higher office. What are some of the campaign finance laws for the state of New York? And to Alex, what are some of the laws in the city, and how has the city historically been a model? Stanley?
Okay. So some of the campaign finance laws in New York includes the LLC loophole, which allows you, if you have an LLC, you can give a max contribution to that LLC because corporations are now considered people because of Citizens United. So once again, going back to that landlord explanation, if I am a landlord and I give you my max contribution, I can't give you any more, but I own 5 buildings and they all are under different LLCs, I can give you a max contribution from all 5 of those LLCs as well. And that's one of those laws.
And so what is this max contribution for governor, would you say?
So for governor, I think it's about $70,000.
And what about state senate?
State senate, it's $18,000.
And for state assembly?
It's $8,800, I believe.
But if you have somebody who's giving from 5 LLCs at $18,000, one person's giving $90,000 through their LLCs.
Exactly.
And in terms of New York City, can LLCs do that too?
No, LLC and corporate contributions are banned in New York City. What we really have in New York State is kind of a tale of 2 systems. The state system is very permissive. It has some of the highest contribution limits of any state that actually bothers to have limits. And the system in New York City is actually a model for the country, in part because it provides an incentive to raise money from everyday people, small donors, by matching small contributions at a rate of $6 for every dollar up to $175. So it really changes the way candidates raise money because they go to their neighborhoods, their communities, to raise money from ordinary New Yorkers rather than relying on contributors that have business before government, which is the case often in New York State.
Now, in New York State, is there any cap on how much people can spend on a race? And same question on the city.
As far as how much you can spend on a race, no, there's not, actually, in New York State at the moment. They've lowered the cap for the LLC loophole. It should be closed completely. I think now it's about $5,000 you can spend in the LLC loophole, but other than that, there's no cap.
And what about in New York City?
There's no aggregate cap on the amount that you can spend on a race, but in terms of giving contributions to an individual candidate, for example, in New York City, it's $5,100 currently, which is still higher than the contribution limit for president, but they're making changes, and that limit is going to be lowered by more than half.
But for folks who are running for city council in New York, if they're participating in the public system with these matching dollars, they can spend $190,000, and if somebody's running for mayor, it's about $7 million. You do have non-participants like Michael Bloomberg, who is allowed to spend $100 million, but the system does suggest that, and I guess in terms of the public matching under the 6-to-1 system, do candidates get all of their money or just a certain amount of it to run for office?
So under the current system, candidates can only receive 55% of their funds being public funds, the match on the small donation. That was recently raised as a result of a charter amendment being approved by the voters in 2018.
We'll get to that soon enough. So I think one of the people sometimes ask me is just what my experience has been under this campaign finance system. I got elected in the New York City campaign finance system. And I think the thing that's most important is for viewers to understand that elected officials spend an inordinate amount of their time fundraising. And I think you spoke about that in Albany. They're doing it every single night. And anytime an elected official is asking for money, that's time they're not working for you. And that's a problem. And when you have candidates for mayor who are able to take $5,100, every time you see a check for $5,100, that wasn't just somebody writing them a check and what have you. It was that elected official calling that donor over and over again. It was that person whining and dining, a millionaire. And in New York City, that's the real estate industry. And what I'll say is that the New York City Public Matching Funds system has allowed me to refuse money from the real estate industry and allowed me to focus on working with residents. In 2013, I was actually one of the top 10 candidates for small dollar contributions, and my most frequent contribution was actually $10. Now, the New York City Public Matching Campaign Finance system seems pretty great and has been a model for other jurisdictions. However, New York City still is in the midst of an affordable housing crisis. Schools are more segregated today than they were before Brown versus the Board of Education. They're overcrowded. Income inequality is rampant. What's still wrong with the system, and how can it be fixed?
Well, I think with the city system, one of the biggest issues is for the citywide candidates. Most of the money that they've raised, about half, has come from large donors. For city council races and some of the smaller offices, it's easier to raise money from small contributors, and we've seen more of that activity. So that's something that's, I think, is something that needs to be improved in the system. Another issue is the amount of the contribution above 175. Even if a large contribution is donated, the first 175 is still matched at 6-to-1. So there's still an incentive for candidates to actually raise from larger donors because they're getting the 6-to-1 match on the first $175.
In the 2013 mayoral race, about 49% of the dollars came in contributions of exactly $4,950, which it was the maximum allowed under law. And when you look at where that came from, it came from 1 in 20 contributions, which meant that one contribution was likely louder than 19 others from other donors. Ultimately, one of the reasons we think that this was happening was because when you're running for mayor, you need to raise $7 million. And even though the city gives you $3.8 million, which is about 55%, that still leaves this big money gap of $2.5 million. That's a big hole to fill. If you were to go to just ask for $175 contributions, that would be 15,000 contributions. And that's just not possible. What we end up seeing is they just need to get 500 people to give them $5,100. And sadly, from the real estate industry, those 500 people are not only existent, but they are more than happy to be willing to do so. So what steps has Reinvent Albany taken in the previous term, 2014 to 2017, to try to close that gap?
Well, to your point, we advocated for a bill that you sponsored, and that bill would raise the amount of public money that candidates can raise from 55% to 85%. It was introduced in the last council, it was introduced in this council, and a majority of council members co-sponsored the bill, indicating their support. Ultimately, it was taken up by the 2018 Charter Revision Commission, which was called by the mayor. It was put before the voters, and 80% of the voters approved that measure, which didn't increase the public match as high as we would have liked. It could have been increased to, the public funds to 85%, but it was increased to 75%, which is very significant, as we saw in the recent public advocates race.
And so just to take a step back, so what is this issue about charter revisions and referendum? How does that work?
So the mayor and even the city council can call a charter revision commission, which is a body of individuals convened to study issues and then issue a report, make recommendations to put measures on the ballot that New Yorkers vote on. And if they vote on those affirmatively, they become law. So it's kind of an alternative route to creating laws, which are traditionally done by the city council, but they amend the charter, which is like the Constitution for the city.
And so when the mayor did that, it actually went around the city council that hadn't passed it before. And there's also referendum where viewers at home, you can collect signatures, you can add something on the ballot, and you can go around the mayor, you can go around the city council. That's actually how we got term limits in the city of New York, because the elected officials surely wouldn't do it. I'm a big proponent of term limits. And so the Mayor's Charter Revision Commission put campaign finance reform on the ballot as question 1, Civic Engagement Commission as question 2, and term limits for community boards as question 3. Now, all 3 had opposition from elected officials, including members of the City Council, where previous efforts had all died. Can you share some of the details of what was on question 1 in terms of lowered contribution limits, increasing matching, and the amount of money that was going to be made available, and whether and when it was going to apply?
Sure. So there were 3 parts to the campaign finance proposal, which was question 1, which, as I mentioned, was approved by the voters with 80% of the vote. For all the offices, it essentially halved the contribution limits, actually a little bit more than half. So, for example, for mayor, the contribution dropped from $5,100 to $2,000. For city council, was dropped to $1,000 being the maximum contribution. It also increased the public match from $6 for every $1 up to $175 to 8-to-1, and 8-to-1 on $250 for citywide offices. So that was amplifying the voice of small donors and encouraging candidates to raise money from ordinary New Yorkers. And so that's, we think, very positive change. It doesn't go into effect right away for most offices, but we will see it as an option that candidates can raise money from.
And so as it was passed, it would only apply to 2021. And I just wanted to take a moment to just ask about what the campaign looked like to get it passed and how Reinvent Albany was involved in getting 1.1 million people to vote for this at 80% of the vote.
Well, I really feel like that campaign began actually with the council bills that you sponsored. That really set the stage for the commission taking up that proposal and then putting it on the ballot. But once the report was issued, which was August of 2018, and it went, we knew it would go before the voters in the form of a ballot question. There was a Democracy Yes, Yes, Yes coalition that was formed. There were many groups that were part of that, labor organizations, good government groups. And we did everything from calls to voters, to going out on the streets and handing out leaflets, to staffing poll sites to make sure people were aware to flip their ballot over, to vote on the questions on the back of the ballot. And I think all of that resulted in the 80% affirmative vote, which was very, very high support for campaign finance reform.
And I wouldn't want to go without mentioning that this ballot question was actually endorsed by Bernie Sanders. It was also after Bernie Sanders, the New York Times also endorsed question 1. And I think what was most surprising to me is 1.4 million people flipped the ballot onto page 4 of the ballot. 1.1 million people voted for campaign finance reform. And when you look at the 2017 election by comparison, that's just about the same number of people who voted for mayor on the Democrat and Republican line, which shows that campaign finance reform is actually a bipartisan issue, and that sometimes a lot of folks might say no one cares about good government, no one cares about campaign finance, but the ballot showed that people do. And honestly, I saw it as a mandate. I didn't understand why we needed to wait until 2021. And so in November, the state of New York elected a new attorney general. That was public advocate Tish James, which created a vacancy when she got sworn into office. On January 2nd, I had introduced a bill number 1288 to apply the new campaign finance system to the 2019 special election and all the elections that would follow, especially starting with the vacancy for public advocate. That election happened in February 2019. Why did Reinvent Albany support Introduction 1288 for the public advocate's race?
Well, when the charter revision put on the ballot the new lower contribution limits, higher match rate for small contributions, we also thought it would be something that would be favorable if it went into effect immediately, rather than it being an option in 2021 for candidates running for office. So we certainly were supportive of your bill to do that, even though that bill only applies now to special elections. But because we support it for all races, we certainly would support it for special elections right now.
It should cover all races between now and 2021. So there's actually going to be a primary in June 2019, and this option should be there for that too.
Right, and that's technically not a special election, correct?
And then there's going to be a general as well. So as mentioned, the mayor signs the bill January 2nd. He calls the special election. So we have a new option for candidates in the special election for public advocate, and candidates could choose between the old system and the new one. Stanley, what happened in the special election for public advocate?
Well, I think most people decided to go into the new one, except for I think one or two candidates who decided to go for the old way. And I think it's pretty obvious that folks saw that this is a system that was going to benefit them and allow them to talk to more voters. And the end result was actually what you saw. Like there was more smaller contributions coming in from people. And I think that, showing from who won the election, the people's voices were really heard through dollars and through votes.
And in terms of who ended up winning, did any of the candidates say that certain money from certain industries wasn't allowed? Yeah,
so Jumaane Williams, as we all know, who won the public advocate race, did not take any money from real estate. at all. A few other candidates at different levels have said that, but for New York City, he's one of the biggest candidates and one of the biggest winners to refuse any money from real estate to win. And I think what that says is, one, that he's for regular New Yorkers. He's ready to fight for stronger housing and rent laws. And then also, he's setting the standard for how everyone else should be functioning moving forward.
And so I think the results are in. We've just flipped how campaigns are financed upside down, with smaller dollar donors on top of big money. For the first time, small dollars made up almost 2/3 of all the money candidates raised, when last time they only made up a paltry quarter. As an added bonus, as you mentioned, Jumaane Williams made history as the first candidate to win citywide office without real estate money. And so what does this mean for candidates moving forward?
This means that there is now a very clear case study that using the dollars of the people works, and you don't have to go to these big spenders. I'm expecting to see in the mayor race coming up in 2021 and some of these other citywide races to see other folks refusing to take real estate money. And I think the real estate industry should be afraid, because it's a very clear sign now that their dollars are not going to be as impactful in the city. And I think that should be a welcoming sign to folks at the state level as well. Just imagine fewer big money fundraisers and more time to talk to your constituents if you just say no to those dollars.
So what can Albany learn from New York City campaign finance? What are you fighting for in Albany, and how can folks get involved?
So what they can learn from New York City campaign finance system is that, one, publicly financed elections work. Two, they empower communities of color, women, and people who have historically been blocked out from the main drums of society to run for office, but not only run, but also win. It also helps to bring in more progressive policies. There's a reason we have people like you and Jumaane Williams, who was in city council there. It's because of that publicly financed system. And in the state Senate, we talked about how we're still having issues with housing and homelessness and transit. The state has a lot of power to influence those things, but guess who's stopping it? Those big money donors in real estate, those big money donors in landlords, the marijuana industry, who wants to make sure they keep that system privatized if it becomes legalized. Those big money donors are blocking things. And you can kind of help to clear that path a little bit if we get a publicly financed system with a 6-to-1 match at the state level. We want to transform the state entirely so that the state legislator can be in lockstep with the city legislator, which is already there.
And what are some of the other pieces? At the beginning of the show, you'd been talking about the LLC loophole, yes. Corporate contributions. There are other pieces you want to do?
Yeah, so we absolutely want to close the LLC loophole. We're really happy that they reduced it, but if you really want to push radical change and shift power to working people, you have to close the LLC loophole. We absolutely need to reduce contributions. No one needs to be giving $70,000 in one shot to one race. Most New Yorkers cannot afford to do that. Most New Yorkers don't make $71,000 a year. Nope. So we don't need to do that. And we obviously want to make sure that, like, you're participating in debates, because that's another thing for the state campaign finance system. If you're going to get these public dollars, you have to participate in at least one debate. You have to be engaging with your constituents. We hope that folks will not take real estate money, but like, it creates a system that is more democratic and is more two-sided as far as the candidate and the community. So those are the things we're pushing for.
Now, Citizen Action is part of a coalition. If folks are watching at home right now, can you tell us the name of the coalition and the link for folks to join that coalition right now? Yes,
so we're part of the Fair Elections Coalition, and it's a coalition with over 200 grassroots groups, community organizations, and labor unions who have joined together because they think that New York State needs to transform their campaign finance system and get a 6-to-1 match. And if you want to learn more information about fair elections, you can check us out at fairelectionsny.org, where it'll give you all the information about the bills we're trying to pass, toolkits so you can get involved, and upcoming events for important dates.
And focusing back at the city, does the success of the special election indicate that we have the perfect system and that we're done, or is there still room for improvement?
There's always room for improvement, but the city system is a model for the country, and it's why we're trying to replicate it through the Fair Elections campaign in New York State, which Reinvent Albany is also part of. That said, every system can be improved. We saw in the public advocates race that there was a significant decrease by half of the amount of money raised from large donors, but there's still money raised from large donors. So we can see further improvements by enabling candidates to raise more money, more public funds. rather than the cap that currently exists. And we can also incentivize candidates to raise money from small donors by not matching the bigger contributions for the first $175, for example. But the city system is, very good, and its foundation serves as a model for other localities and states across the country.
And so if folks watching at home want to see a full public match so you can finally get all the big money out, you can look up your council member at council.nyc.gov. You can type in your address. It'll give you your council member. You can call them. You can email them. Ask them to sponsor Introduction 732. You can sign a petition to get big money out of politics at benkallos.com/bigmoneyout. I want to thank you for joining us for this episode of Manhattan Neighborhood Network's Represent NYC. You can learn more about our guest organizations by visiting reinventalbany.org. You can join Citizen Action at citizenactionny.org/member. I'll actually share that I'm a member of Citizen Action. And don't forget to sign our petition to get big money out of New York City politics at benkallos.com/bigmoneyout.